I guess we're live. So, welcome everybody. Great to have you all on board. Welcome to our last speaker of the month for this year. Yeah. And we're very happy to have Rukmini with us. Um, and, you know, I've already introduced Rukmini over email, and we'll also do a little bit more of it in a while. Just wanted to welcome you all once again, and it'd be great if we can have more videos on as well. So, shall we get going, Rukmini? Yeah. And I'm hoping Priya and Rupi will keep getting people in as they log in. So, 1 minute, let me just spotlight. Okay. So, welcome, Rukmini. Great to have you here. It's also quite heartening for me in one way. You've been one of the most regular people on Purnam Cafe. I think you probably at best only missed a week out of this entire 4 or 5 months. So it's good to see you on this other side now and interact with you and also understand some of your life experiences and listen to you. So welcome again. Thanks for making time for this. So you identify yourself as a peacemaker, a peace educator, peace builder, yeah? And you're also, of course, a leadership consultant, coach, facilitator. And there's also something recently that you said you also write poetry, and that's also write, yeah, that's something that's very close to your heart. So we have this sort of tradition, if I can use that word even, or this habit of starting with a song or a poem. Yeah. So maybe we can start with a poem of yours, if you don't mind sharing, and then we'll take it from there. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Naveen. And so the poem I'd chosen for today, and Naveen and I were speaking about what might be a good start. And the poem that came up was something that's around my work in the peace building space, and we thought that might be relevant to today's conversation. I usually write poetry when I'm very disturbed. It's my way of, in a way, processing what is challenging. So it may not always be happy poetry. More often than not, it's not. This is one such poem that I want to share. It's titled "To You Who Killed." So 16th of December 2014, there was an attack on the Army Public School in Peshawar, Pakistan, and close to 150 children died in the attack. They were shot down by terrorists. And this poem was in response to that incident. Here it goes. You who methodically shot innocent children, even as they trembled in terror and begged for escape. You who thought nothing of revenge, even if it meant unimaginable brutality. You who want the world to cower in fear, even as the world cannot understand your act. What hurt you so that you had to kill? What made you feel so unheard that you had to make us listen through the heartrending wails of grieving mothers? What made you feel so rejected that you had to find a voice through the silent pain of benumbed fathers? Why do you feel so unseen that you had to prove your presence by replacing parents' dreams with nightmares? I do not have it in me to blame you. Perhaps I created you too, by ignoring those beyond my little world. I cannot bring myself to condemn you. Perhaps I killed dreams too, by refusing to engage with the peripheries of my life. I do not want to punish you. Perhaps I marginalized you by labeling you as undesirable. I stand in grief. I mourn in pain. But I know not if the grief and the pain are for the lives lost through those little ones, or for the lives in you that stand ostracized. Did some mother not nurture you in her womb and dress you with care as she sent you to play? Did some father not work a little harder to earn that extra penny for your future? In killing those children, you bereaved your parents. They lost you to your choices. How do we find you back and integrate you in us? How do we stop rejecting you so that terror is not your only option? Talk to me, abandoned child. The lost lives tell me I cannot heal death with more death. Are you willing to give life a chance?
Wow, it's beautiful. Thank you. Wow. Hopefully, we can build on this a bit more as we go forward. But thank you for sharing that very moving invitation. Yeah. So how we're going to go about this evening is Rukmini and I'll have some amount of, we'll have a conversation. I have a set of questions and things to talk to Rukmini about, ask her about. And we'll go for about half an hour to 45 minutes. And then we'll open it up for a conversation with everybody. And in the meantime, if there are questions or something, if there are comments, questions that you'd like to ask her as well, please leave them in the chat here. Yeah, those of us who are in the Zoom call. So Rukmini, yeah, so you work with peace building, what does that mean? I hear this word peace building, what's the kind of peace building you're engaged with?
Yeah, that's a difficult thing to define. So for me, peace building is really about starting to work within oneself, and sometimes that's enough, in the sense that if I manage to build and sustain and continue to work at peace within myself, then that radiates out in the world. For me, I work with that definition of peace building, in the sense that, yes, there is the idea of track one, diplomacy and peace building at that layer. And yet, if you're looking at sustaining peace, it's something that we need to do at the layer of the individual. It can't be, only about fixing the system, because at the end of the day, if the individuals inhabiting the system are the same, we're not going to be able to sustain even the resemblance of peace that we might build outside of the world. So a lot of my work has really been around civilian engagement in peace building, looking at how you and I can work on contributing to peace. So yeah, if you're looking at a simple definition, that's how I hold it in my mind and work.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. So what can us civilians engage with? Because often it looks like conflicts are at the level of larger groups or collectives of people, countries or ethnic groups, or it feels like it's almost out of the hands of the individual in some sense. The individual feels quite powerless and like a very small piece in this process, if at all. So what is it that ordinary individuals like you and I can do? Yeah.
It's there's so much that we can do. It's just that we've somehow educated and colonized ourselves into believing that there's the system out there and there are these larger institutions and somehow larger people that work on those systems and regular people don't. And in many ways, that's the confusion that I grew up with as well. As a child, I would see the likes of Mother Teresa, who left everything and they're dedicating their lives to peace in what they do. And there's, on the other extreme, you have like Miss Worlds and Miss Universes saying there needs to be world peace, but there wasn't really anything in between in terms of what does it mean for me. And that question stayed alive because I grew up in an environment of a lot of domestic violence and abuse, and so there was this, there was a disconnect around, well, what does it even mean when people say world peace? What if my life is not quite peaceful? And so if I'm not peaceful in the system around me, can the system be peaceful? So that question stayed on, and so what's emerged in the process is to look at, of course, how it panned out for me was also opportunities to, in a sense, formally study peace and conflict resolution. But to come back to what you said, how can we engage in our in peace building in our lives? For me, I think what's unresolved within us, the boundaries that we fail to manage in our personal individual lives, get projected out onto our borders. And so what we are seeing as conflict outside is really things we've not resolved within us. So first step for me would be really to respond to conflicts within myself. Conflicts around my own identity, conflicts with perhaps people around me, with the work that I do, with perhaps families, friends, anything that impacts peace in my own ambit. And then that eventually, of course, creates a ripple effect. Of course, that we can also work at the level of education around it in terms of how do we, equip people with tools and techniques to be able to do this, and that is part of my work in peace education. But having said that, I wouldn't say that only people that work formally in peace building or peace education need to engage with peace. It's important that each of us as civilians engage with it, because it's our world, and if we are to belong in the world, we need to engage with it.
Beautiful. So what are the, how do you go about this? I can understand it, that this is in a sense a personal journey. Yeah. So how does your work come in here? What do you do with individuals, or what's the kind of engagement, or what are the kind of spaces you open up in your work for individuals to engage with this?
So in the professional space, I work in two areas, so to say. One area sort of pays the bills, and the other area is the work of my heart. And yet both of them for me are very closely linked to the idea of peace building. So in the peace building space, a lot of my work is around creating spaces for dialogue around various aspects. Like, we've been doing a lot of work around faith over the years, looking at interfaith dialogues. Also other aspects of dialogues around caste and religion and gender, and all aspects of identities that relate to conflict. So sometimes this is done through institutions. So I tend to work with a lot of educational institutions around this. A lot of this work is also open to public online, so that there are dialogue series that I host online. So yeah, a large part of it is through creating dialogue spaces. I've also been in the last couple of years running a peace fellowship program for adolescents, where we look at a one-year program where they learn concepts around peace building and conflict resolution, and then they go back and apply that through assignments and projects into their own lives. And it's fascinating in terms of how some of these children, adolescent children, about typically between 14 to 16, 17 years of age, a lot of them have gone back to contexts like looking at bullying in schools and how that impacts that creates conflicts in their own lives. Some of them have gone back to talk about how domestic staff are treated in urban, typically building spaces where in Mumbai, for example, you'll see a lot of apartment complexes where you have separate elevators for domestic staff, and how that sort of discrimination creates conflict. So that there is a caste and class element that needs to be dialogued with there. So yeah, it's they're dealing with really very real issues that impact us on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, I don't quite think of peace building as a process of getting to answers. To me, it's really about deepening the questions and looking at where does the question lead us.
Wow. Thank you, Rukmini. That sounds like a lot of food for thought. And it also sounds very powerful what you're doing with these adolescents, because it's that age where um, a lot of these questions start emerging much more. At least that's how it feels like to me. And it's a wonderful time to be providing that kind of an explorative space for them to really look at these questions and these issues in their lives. Wow. Okay. So what happens in these dialogue circles? If you could give us an idea of what kind of people come, what kind of conversations happen, or what kind of issues are engaged with. When we say dialogue, is it only verbal, or are there other processes that go on along with this? I'm kind of curious to understand this a bit more when you say dialogue.
Um, well, a wide variety of things happen. So let me pick up maybe one context or one example to work with here. So last few years, we've been consistently doing uh, an interfaith dialogue. And this year, of course, with COVID, we couldn't do it in person, but 2021, we're beginning a dialogue facilitation training process with educators through the US State Department. So that's something I'm looking forward to. What tends to happen in these spaces is, of course, dialogue in the sense of conversation, in terms of everyone that's present, uh, in a way, claiming or sometimes even expressing their discomfort with their own identities around faith and religion. A lot of it is, of course, inherited in the sense that you're told that you're born into a certain religion and you're expected to practice in a certain way. And some take to it, some don't. So a part of the dialogue is around how they relate to the idea of faith itself. And then, of course, it doesn't quite end there, because there's also so much happening to the individual, because there is something in the collective unconscious, right? So a lot of these spaces are also about process work, working very deeply with the collective unconscious and the individual unconscious, looking at how do things permeate between the boundaries of these two spaces. And in that sense, therefore, that there is also a lot of work with emotions, with our own belief systems, with identity. And part of it is, like I said, through conversations, but a lot of it is also through art, through movement, through somatic body work, uh, poetry, theater, all kinds of elements that are used in the process.
Wow, sounds quite fascinating. So when we say dialogue circles, it's not just that people sitting and talking, but really
Yeah, it
exploring it.
can't be a cerebral process, right?
Hmm,
Because
hmm.
conflicts aren't quite created here. I mean, conflicts can be debated here, but
Hmm.
they're created because our needs are not met, or at least we believe our needs are not met. So we do need to drop down to that layer and converse from there.
Beautiful. Wow. So, where does this kind of work happen? Are there any conflict zones uh, you you work in, the so-called conflict zones, or is it, because I've heard in the past you talk about Palestine, or you're working
Mm.
in Palestine. Is that the only place you worked in, or other places you're engaged with? Or what's that like? Where
So
is this anchored? Huh?
most of my work has been in the Indo-Pak and the Israel-Palestine space. That's where I've facilitated most of the dialogues. Usually the physical, I mean, if you're meeting physically and doing this, it typically happens in neutral territory, like Indo-Pak dialogues often happen in the US or in Sri Lanka or some space where everyone can go without visa troubles. I'd love to do more work in Kashmir, but somehow there's always a pushback. We've tried several times over the years. We're starting again now, but that's a challenging region to get into. Uh, so yeah, part of it is in physical spaces. A lot of it now, of course, is in online spaces. So yeah, it depends.
So what happens if when we say we work with the Indo-Pak conflict or people around along across this divide, who shows up? I mean, if you're allowed to share, what kind of people come for these? Are they people from both countries, or what kind of people come? And what's that process like? It's probably a week or more. I don't know how long you spend together, but I'm guessing it's a few days together in a safe space to listen to each other and to really express. So what is that process like? I'm sure you already named some of this, but if there is something more to add to this, it would be fascinating to hear.
So the people that come, like I said, I tend to work with educational institutions a lot. So a lot of these tend to be young adults and adolescents, but also a lot of educators and people that work with that age group. So yeah, that's, I mean, as specific as I can get without wanting to compromise security for anyone. But yeah, it
Fair
tends
enough.
to be a
Thank you.
lot of educators and the educated.
Yeah. Thank you. So Biren has got an interesting request, which is, can you share some positive experiences from Indo-Pak dialogues or the Israel-Palestine dialogues, or that engagement, without again compromising on privacy and whatnot. If there's anything inspiring or anything interesting
Um,
stories that you can share with us.
I'm thinking of this one particular dialogue where things got very heated between an Israeli contingent and a Palestinian contingent, and I mean, and almost to the point of them wanting to come to blows. And at that point in time, one of the Israeli participants, she was a teacher. She got up and said, "I want to share something personal," and she spoke about how. I think a couple of years before that dialogue happened, she'd lost her husband to a sudden stroke, and because he was otherwise healthy, they decided to donate his organs. And under Israeli law, you were not allowed to directly communicate with people who were the recipients of those organs till a certain time passed. And so they donated the organs, and I think after about 3 or 6 months, they were given a choice around, if you want to communicate with the families that received the organs, you can talk to them. And she said, I didn't want to know about every organ, but I did want to know where his heart went, because it's a heart that loved me for 20 years and I wanted to know who received it. And she got to know it went to a Palestinian man. And she said that at that moment in time, the conflict dropped for me. Our bodies don't know the difference. And yeah, for me, that was a powerful moment, because I mean, that's so true. Our bodies don't know the conflict. It's only here that we hold it. And if only we can dialogue from something that's much deeper than here. If we can teach our bodies to dialogue in a very somatic way, if our bodies could speak, the dialogue would be very different.
Oh, that's very touching. So it sounds like people who come to these circles and to these spaces, to these often carry this conflict into this space when they come. But what happens when they leave? What has that experience been like? Are they able to dissolve some of this, or if not all of it, or do they carry back friendships from these spaces? What happens post or at the end of such an event? What really happens to the people? What's the transformation that you've noticed?
I've, of course, given that we're still going back into systems that continue to hold the conflict, we're nowhere close to resolution. What does happen is that we start connecting with the human that is the so-called other, and that changes the tone of what happens next. I've heard stories of how people have gone back and started initiatives, like cross-border initiatives. There's this beautiful thing about some Israeli and Palestinian women doing this really simple thing about baking bread together. But there's so much power in that, in terms of, bringing the dough from across the wall. When you go to Israel, you have that wall across the West Bank, right? So there's one bag of dough that gets passed on here, it gets baked here, it goes back there. And I find that beautiful in terms of just that personal commitment to saying, I see the human that is you. And that there's so much possibility that it leads back to.
Wow. Okay, so in a sense, it humanizes, this space humanizes the so-called other. Yeah, it's not just an enemy anymore.
Yeah, because you're no longer seeing a passport there, right? You're seeing a person
Mm.
there. That makes all the difference.
Wow. Okay. Any particularly challenging moments for you personally that while you've been involved in such a situation or such a space
Um,
where you felt like, okay, I'm out of my depth here, and how, and what do I do? Like a little lost with the challenge in front of one. Yeah.
um, well, there's several moments. I can't really pick out one, but it's particularly challenging when you're with children and the vulnerability and the trust that they bring into the process. Um, I remember once we were in dialogue in the US, and that one, and they had just about learned to open up, both the children from India and Pakistan, and simultaneously there was an Israel-Palestine dialogue going on, and they 2 weeks into the dialogue, they just learned to open up, and they were sharing very personal stories about how they've been taught to perceive the other as an enemy and all of that, and in that dialogue we would often use a lot of sports to work process things. And when you're on the football field and you're working with each other, you don't really see an enemy there, right? You're really on the same team in that sense. And so for them it was a very fascinating process of opening up in terms of, wow, this is someone I can make friends with and play with. And at that point, I think 2 or 3 weeks into the dialogue, again, the bombing started in Gaza, and at the same day, there was, I think, a blast in Karachi, and that whole process just went into silence because everyone was numb about saying, are we right in trusting this process? And when children ask you that question, you don't really have an answer to that. You can only request for trust and courage and pray.
Yeah, it sounds so heartbreaking in one sense because it's something that feels like it's just begun to sprout,
Yeah.
And then to sort of crush it again feels quite heartbreaking.
Yeah, in the collective, we don't quite hold the intent for peace yet.
Okay. Phew. So what lies ahead for 2021 um, in terms of your engagement around this that you're allowed to tell us and share with us?
Well, there's like I mentioned earlier, we're doing this facilitator training for interfaith dialogue with educators, and yeah, that's largely for educators, university educators in Western India. So that's something that I'm looking forward to. Also hoping to continue a dialogue series that I had begun this year, which is called Look into the Mirror. And it started off as an online series, but I'm also hoping at some point it also gets offline and we're able to do some on ground work around it. But that series is largely around looking at truth and reconciliation from an inside out perspective. What sort of truths do I need to uh, voice out within myself, and what do I need to reconcile with, and how do I then uh, contribute to the system from there, from that space of reconciliation. So yeah, those are two things that are already in process. So, and yeah, hopefully there's more.
Wonderful, very interesting. So, could we speak about this truth and reconciliation a bit more? So, is this when you say it's a dialogue series? It's a one-on-one conversation between you and somebody, and then, or when you say look into the mirror, like what exactly is happening there? You know.
So yeah, it's so far the format has been that a one-to-one sort of a dialogue with an audience, and the intention is to yeah, at some point also bring it into an offline space and see how we could do deeper work around it, and also to look at how do we convert some of the insights from these dialogue into on-ground action projects. How, what is the sort of community-based projects that we can create through something like this? Uh, and the reason it evolved was because because firstly, of course, the kind of political state that India is in right now, and in general the subcontinent is in a very polarized state right now. And while there is truth and reconciliation work at an external level, which we certainly need, it can't sustain by itself. We also need to look at what are things that we practice on a day-to-day basis, which doesn't allow for reconciliation. So some of the dialogues we've had so far are around partition and the kind of stories that we continue to hold, and in a way rubbing salt into the wounds, and the media tends to add on to that. So we've spoken about the partition, we've spoken about racism in India, particularly in the context of how people from the Northeast tend to be discriminated against. And yeah, and it's something that a lot of us tend to engage in a very unconscious way, right? And that's something that doesn't quite allow for reconciliation. Something as simple as people from the Northeast being called terms like Chinky and Nepali and all of that, which they're expected to take in jest, but it's extremely hurtful. And uh, the more we engage in such unconscious behavior around discrimination, the more challenging it is to then build peace. So yeah, those are some of the things we've been working with.
Okay. Wow. So, as you also mentioned, right, it does look like there's a lot more polarization happening
Yeah.
in India today. A lot more divisiveness. Yeah, so that's creeping in. So, clearly, this kind of work is all the more necessary. But how is it being seen? Is there a lot of support for it, or is it becoming more and more difficult to engage in this kind of work today? To be building bridges across these divisive or these dividing groups. Is it becoming harder and harder, or?
um I guess it's both, right? I mean, it's like the more you work in that area, the deeper the conflict goes on the other side. So yeah, that resistance is expected, and that resistance comes sometimes in terms of threatening calls, sometimes in terms of trolling on social media and things like that. But I guess that's part of what be the fact that
Part of the
we are live
territory. Yeah.
in the system. It's a part of it. um, at the same time, I feel it's important to continue with this work, uh, also because I know a lot of this work for me is possible because of my Brahmin surname, and I'd rather use that privilege and the safety that it affords me, rather than sitting back and doing nothing about it.
Interesting. So why do you say that? Is it because, what privileges does this offer you? What safety does this last name offer you in this regard? Yeah.
I mean, imagine if I were a Dalit or a tribal person trying to hold dialogues around caste in India at this point. I mean, I'd probably be in a lot of danger. I mean,
Hmm.
in that
Okay.
sense, the much as I'm a very grudging Brahmin, in the sense I find it very difficult to accept that part of my identity. It is a privilege that needs to be put to good use.
Interesting. So you, if I hear you right, sorry, I'm going back a little early to what you said. So you also receive like threatening calls and stuff from people. So
Yeah.
that's part of the job in some sense. Part of the, yeah.
Well, I guess not part of the job description, but yeah,
Sure.
happens.
Okay. It comes with the territory.
Yeah.
So you have personally received some of these calls, if I hear you right.
Yeah.
Wow, sounds scary. So Kuljinder ji has a question. What's the major reason in these conflicts, faith-based conflicts, race-based conflicts? Is it economic interest? Is it territorial interests? Is it emotional wounds? Yeah, what really are some of the fundamental reasons this conflict happens? If I'm not so sure if I did justice to this question, but from whatever I could understand through chat.
All of that, Kuljinder ji, and more, in the sense that, yeah, in many ways, actually, in my early days in peace building work,
Can you
the
clarify?
sorry.
Go ahead, Kuljinder ji. Please keep it short, please. But yeah,
Yeah, only that out of as I mentioned these, which is you can say more poisonous, which is more dangerous and more difficult to handle, and which is spreading more chaos. That's what I want to know about from you.
So, of course, I mean, there is a lot of economic angle to it in many ways. So, when I did my Rotary Peace Fellowship way back, uh, my dissertation was around business and peace, and why is it that we're not talking about peace building in the corporate space? Because at the end of the day, wars and conflict sustains because someone's profiting from it, and for some reason we're not really taking that seriously and not having enough uh, conflict sensitivity in the business space. So yes, there is an economic factor. uh, there is also, I would think, emotional wounds that we choose to sustain, right? And I would genuinely believe it's a choice that we are making individually and collectively. When there is a choice to, in a way, talk about it, perhaps even move beyond it, we choose to sustain it because there are aspects of our identity that are so closely tied to it, and we don't quite want to let go of it yet. Uh, uh, I wouldn't say we are incapable of letting go of it. It's perhaps we've not known another choice, and we've not created the safety to let go of it yet. So a lot of dialogue for me is really about creating safety to say that I can choose to be something I don't know yet.
Okay, thank you. There's one more bit that I'd like to focus on before we open it up for, because you said there are two parts of this, Rukmini, yeah? So we spoke about the peace building bit, which you called your vocation, and you said something else funds it. Yeah, so what is that? What's that part of your work that you haven't yet really spoken much about? You mentioned it in passing, but yeah.
So yeah, that part of my work is a consulting practice that I run, which largely works around organization and leadership development. Largely work with corporate organizations in this part of the world. South Asia, Middle East is where I largely work, and that entails a lot of consulting, coaching, facilitation with business leaders. Um, Primarily around the idea of uh, conscious leadership. How do we bring in consciousness into business? And also, in a very sly way, looking at how do we look at conflict sensitivity in business practices and policies.
What does it mean to bring consciousness into business? I mean, I, yeah, could you
Um,
speak a bit more about this?
in a very simple way, it would be about looking at, can we also work on purpose beyond profit? I mean, it's essential for a business to earn profit, and at the same time, it's not quite enough.
Okay, so to me,
It's
there seems to be a clash there
mm,
because how a lot of our current corporate priorities seem to be designed
mm,
are around profits and growth. Yeah.
mhm.
And so, where does, is there much, do people receive this message much and really do much transformation based on that? Is there a reprioritization that's happening that you at least encountered? Because I don't see it much. A lot of conscious capitalism talk I've heard of,
Mhm.
but at the end of the day, it's more capitalism and less consciousness, really. Though though there's a lot of talk around this
Yeah.
phrase. So,
I would think the change is very slow and steady. I see this in a lot of organizations that I work with. It's the younger generation that's challenging business a lot in terms of saying that you know, unless this business integrates well with communities that it impacts, I don't want to work here, and they're taking quite a strong stand around it. I would think in many ways, what we call the gig economy has uh, also surfaced because of these decisions that are getting made. That I don't want to be with an organization that doesn't align with my values. So, in that sense, it's slowly changing from within. Uh, and yeah, like you say, yes, the common narrative is and even the media narrative is around the fact that profit is essential. But I would think of it's like, it's like how breath is essential for living, right? I mean, profit is essential for a business because you've got to exist and survive. So it's essential, and at the same time, I don't live in order to breathe.
hmm.
So there needs to be a purpose beyond that profit also, and I think it's a slow process, but we are seeing shifts.
Okay, so you do feel there's hope, though change is very slow and
Yeah.
yeah, but it's happening is what you feel. Very interesting. So one more thing, Rukmini. So I noticed that in your tagline of your company, it says co-creating compassionate organizations. So what does that mean? What are compassionate organizations, and how do you co-create them?
Well, co-creation in the sense that for me, I tend to go in as an external stakeholder, right, as a consultant or as a coach or facilitator, and i- so it is in that sense a partnership. People within organizations also need to respond to it, and in
Okay,
many ways they need to initiate it, and I can support it. So in that sense, it is always a co-creative
okay,
process. And when you say compassionate organizations, for me it's about, can we talk about the fact that we're working with a system, we're working with a business plan and all of that. And at the end of the day, uh, can we stay cognizant of the fact that there are humans running this system? And can we deal with them as humans and not as resources?
Okay, so compassion, say, for the associates within the organization,
Within, but
or is it
also
also
compassion to the entire ecosystem, right? Am I compassionate towards the planet when I make a decision in the boardroom? Am I compassionate towards the community that I impact?
Okay.
Am I compassionate to the families of my employees that get impacted in the process of work? So yeah, I mean, compassion not in terms of being sentimental, but looking at the fact that I do make an impact in every decision that I make at work, and can I stay aware of that and choose accordingly?
Okay, very interesting. So from what I hear you saying, that there are organizations, business organizations, who make choices based on compassion as one of the considerations, meaning that they make choices which are less extractive and exploitative. Partly, have I heard you right?
Yeah, I would hold it as an aspiration and a continued aspiration, right? It's not a much like peace. I think compassion is something that we need to continually strive for. It's not an accomplishment that I'm there and
Of course.
there's nirvana
Yeah.
and that's it, right?
Yeah.
It's something we need to continually work towards.
Okay. So of course it's an aspiration. So, but it's a consideration amongst other things, profits, but also how is this being earned?
Yeah.
Sensitivity, compassion, all that. So that's very interesting. So how do you understand leadership then? In today's time, there's more and more divisiveness, conflict, polarization, whatnot. It looks like the world is spiraling out of control in some sense, or there's a lot more conflict. So how do you understand leadership in such times? There are probably many forms of leadership, but what
I
calls
could
you?
probably give
What
you a
inspires
2-day
you?
answer on that.
Okay. What will a 2-minute answer be? Yeah.
Well, I think for me, it starts with myself. How do I lead myself? In the sense that there's always the possibility that aspects of my ego lead me, and aspects of my ego could include my body, my emotions, my opinions, judgments, thoughts. And do they lead me, or is there something higher than that is able to lead those aspects of the personality? For me, it starts there. And if you then look at leading teams or systems, it's pretty much that, in terms of, am I being driven by emotional appeal in a system? Am I being driven by a call for popularity and those aspects? Am I being driven by fear of judgment, or am I staying in service of what is right? I mean, if you look at, everything in nature, or I'm guessing perhaps even in the larger universe, everything is in service of something else. And for me, leadership is about staying cognizant of that fact. Am I staying in service of something else? Is my system that I lead, is it in service of something higher? Just to
Wow,
stay cognizant of that, for me, would be leadership.
that's very powerful. Thank you. So could we speak a little bit about your own journey as well? How did you get here? What got you interested in peace building, leadership, organizational change, transformation? Where did you start? I'm not talking about an educational background, but how did you get onto this? What got you on this path?
So I guess followed my instinct.
Okay,
Made
that
some
sounds
mad
easy in
decisions
one
along
sense.
the way.
Yeah, tell us about the mad decisions. What's the first mad turn that you took that led to further mad turns? Huh. Yeah, quite a few people are sending their thumbs up. So yeah, give us some mad stories. What's the maddest thing that you did? Oh, let's start with the beginning. Yeah.
Oh, well, okay, start at the beginning. I started working when I was about 12.
12.
Yeah,
That
because
sounds like child labor. Yeah. Tell us more. What happened? Huh? Huh.
well, largely because, like I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a situation where, I mean, neither of my parents were working, and uh, the so the situation was largely around, if I had to go to college, I knew I had to figure something out for myself, and so started taking tuitions and things like that for smaller kids in the locality that I used to live. Used to those I guess pre-internet days. I've not really seen this now, but there used to be flyers and pamphlets that would be distributed in railway stations and things like that. So picked up some money doing things like that, random things like that. And by the time I got to college, I think internet was just kind of uh, coming up. So taught myself to code and uh, you know made some money doing content and websites and stuff. And yeah, so one thing kind of led to the other in terms of figuring out what's the kind of work I wanted to do. And at the same time, in college, I was always volunteering one thing or the other. So there was Rotaract Club, or there was something else and something else. So in many ways, the whole idea of leadership and connection with community and conflicts sort of came from there, because one was, like I said, this whole personal question around what does peace even mean, uh, and at the same time, when you would work in, for example, doing literacy projects in slum communities, you're trying to figure out what's the larger system doing, around something like this. So those questions continued to evolve as I volunteered more and more. And so, yeah, I think by the time I graduated, I figured that this is the sort of work that I wanted to do. And then, yeah, then one thing led to the other. First few years of my professional life, I was employed with different organizations in India and in Singapore. And then one fine day, woke up in Singapore and said, this doesn't make sense any longer. In terms of, yeah, it's very fulfilling, it's secure and all of that, and yet there was something missing in terms of firstly wanted to integrate the peace building and the business side of work, which wasn't quite happening in employment. um, and I had this really plum offer from Microsoft to lead a talent management team in the Greater China region, which was probably an offer to die for at that point in time. And yeah, just followed my heart and said, that's not for me.
What? I thought you would say yes. Why not? Yeah.
It was, yeah, I guess that was probably one of those wild decisions, in the sense that I mean, even as a child, I grew up in this fear of saying there isn't enough money and there needs to be financial security. And to give that up and say that there's something else that's calling. I don't know what's calling, but I know there's something else that's calling. So yeah, that was one of those wild decisions that I said, okay, I'm going to get out of the space, just clear space and see what comes in, and allow for things to emerge. So yeah, that was in a way a turning point in 2008 when I moved back to India.
Oh, so you give up that job, if I understand you right,
Yeah,
and sort of
yeah,
moved back. Okay, and then this whole journey started
yeah,
from there, or rather deepened from there.
yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like an easy ride. You must have heard a lot of comments from people, so-called
Oh
well-wishers,
yeah.
saying you're sounding very impractical. What are you doing with your life? A lot of free
Absolutely, I
advice.
still hear
You
it.
must have received a lot of free advice. Yeah.
Oh
So
yes.
how do you cope with all of that? Or how do you deal with all of that?
uh, I guess it's, at some point you need to decide around what are you serving. And if I were to listen to those voices and all that advice, then I'm only serving my fear. And I mean, that doesn't contribute to me, it doesn't contribute to anyone else in the world. I'm not really helping anybody by playing small.
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you. So it's been what, 12 years now that you've sort of walked the less trodden path. Um, how now looking back, would you say you've been able to take care of your balance all these different needs, your own dreams, but also make sure that you're able to have a livelihood doing what you're doing? And so would you say, looking back, that you've managed to crack this code of living one's passion but also finding, or is it an unfolding journey in some sense?
Yeah, it is a journey in the sense that so the business model, so to say, of Exult, my consulting practice, was to say that, yeah, I want to spend part of my time in the corporate space because one needs to pay the bills, and also because I genuinely enjoy doing that work. And that also kind of funds the other work that I continue to do voluntarily. So yeah, that's how it's been. And I won't say it's not challenging. There are times it is very challenging. Um, but yeah, it's been a process of consistent growth and sort of encounter with myself. So in that sense, it's been rewarding.
Wow, thank you. It sounds like yeah, it sounds like you're carrying this with a lot of grace. While it might not, it doesn't sound like a smooth ride, but it looks like you figured out your own niche solution for yourself. That there are these two vocations that you're engaged with, that and that you love, and one is able to support the other, and there's fulfillment to be drawn from both. Yeah, fascinating. Thanks, Rukmini. I mean, I could ask more, but we're already like at close to 9 o'clock, and then there are people threatening to kidnap you and stuff. So we could ask them why, So I'll open it up now for any questions and other comments and anything else that others might have to share with you and engage with you on. So I'll try and shut up for a bit and then open it up for a larger conversation. And yeah, so the floor is open. Let me just go into gallery view.
Yeah, it was a great exposition of your passion. Yeah, I just wanted to know how you deal with. I come across very often. I'm a doctor and I'm a surgeon, and people, even amongst my own colleagues, different discriminating, saying that somebody, okay, you do a little job on this guy, just because he belongs to a certain community, and such things, and then passing comments uh, uh, without any kind of unconsciously, as you mentioned. Uh, and then I usually I stand my ground and I tell them no. We are all human beings, I don't differentiate between any community, any caste. I'm a doctor. I'm supposed to provide this kind of a complete treatment, and for the healing of the patient. So sometimes I feel they may mistake me or misunderstand me. How do you handle such situations?
Um, well, I wish there was an easy answer, doctor. That there usually isn't. But I find it important to engage in that conversation in terms of, if someone tells me not to interact with or support someone from a certain community, I feel it's important to talk about what is it that they fear. what is it that is triggering that sort of a response in them. Also to, again, I mean, I tend to go back to that inside out view around caste particularly, and this of course extends to religion and other things going forward, but what was the whole origin of caste? If we look at going back to where it started off, a lot of our literature talks about how caste was largely around the idea of temperament and what sort of a profession might serve a certain temperament the best, right? And so when we're talking about the let's say the Shudra or the Vaishya or the Kshatriya or the Brahmin in me, how do I treat each of these castes within myself even today? And do I allow space for each of those castes to exist inside of me? And therefore, how does that permission or that allowance reflect outside of me? Very often when it comes to castes, I tend to share my own experiences with people when I'm confronted with opinions around it. And usually what tends to emerge is that a lot of the reservations that people have is simply stories that they've heard, and things that have beliefs that have been passed on, and they're not even their own beliefs. And the point of the conversation is not so much to turn them around, but really to say, can you at least start questioning it? And maybe a response or a shift might happen today, maybe it happens 20 years later, but yeah, this work is really intergenerational work. I'm not really expecting for it to be fixed in my lifetime. But it's important to be at it.
Yeah, thank you. It's very important to stand the ground.
Stand that ground and also hold space for where this other person is. Maybe they have genuine fears, maybe they have genuine experiences of that are unpleasant, and it's important to not disregard that. So the idea is not really to shift or to transform that person. I mean, their fear or hurt or whatever is it that they're coming with is as valid as my belief is, and it's important to hold space for both.
No, I have this. So few of my friends,
Doctor,
they have a
doctor,
deep.
one
Yeah.
minute, doctor. Shall we go around this table a bit? Yeah. Also ask other people if they have any questions and responses. Yeah. So, are there other questions, other sharings?
Can I?
Then we'll keep it brief. Yeah. Questions and sharings in brief. Yes, Uniji.
Yeah. Just 2 points. One is, can you put that poem that you wrote on the chat so that we could have a look at that, because it goes,
Sure.
might and goes off. It'll be nice to have a look at it.
Sure.
Second thing is, you mentioned something about this training of the children. Now, is there any initiative by which this becomes what you could possibly call as a mandatory presence of a person of this kind, of your caliber, or that who practices, let's call it as peacemaking, as a vocation, and train the children, or in each school, if a person is positioned like that, it would be helpful. Is there any initiative either sponsored by the state or sponsored by a group of institutions that every school has a person of that kind?
Oh, that would be a dream, Uniji. I don't think it's a mandated thing at the moment, but sorry.
Even voluntary?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
No, even any institution has done anything of that kind at all, mandatory or not?
So yes, I do work with a lot of schools and colleges that are working towards it, but not quite enough. So we need a lot more of this work, and it also, of course, needs to be very contextualized in the sense that the kind of peace education work we might do in, let's say, an urban Mumbai is very different from what needs to be done in a Kashmir or in an Naxal area. So it needs to be contextualized and it needs to be done. I'm hoping more educational institutions pick up on it, because a lot of what we teach in the name of education, particularly in schools today, is, I mean, we're only passing down opinions. We're not really allowing space for thought. We're not allowing space for investigating things that are critical, including one's relationship with conflict or one's relationship with identities. And those are things that, at the end of the day, for me, that's real education. I mean, the rest of it is literacy, and that can be picked up even by oneself. But what we really need to hold educational space for, in terms of really educating the personality, is really about working with aspects of identity, and we're not quite doing that enough. I do wish more institutions pick up on that.
Super. Thank you. Other questions, sharings?
Hi, Rukmini, Rupinder.
Hi.
Hi. So, Rukmini, what really kind of got to me was when you talked about, resolving the conflict within, maybe before trying to sort out the world's conflict outside. And I was wondering if you could just speak a little more about how does one bring oneself to become a little more conscious of this? Something in me tells me it's actually the other way around. We kind of jump into doing work outside because we have our own restlessness inside. But how does one really approach it the other way around? So kind of always becoming a little more conscious and going in from inside to outside. Can you talk a little more about it?
So I think both of it is essential. So I'm not really saying that it can only be, inside out. It can also be the other way around. But I mean, both those paths in a way need to meet midway. And yeah, at the level of the individual, I don't think it's a choice around should I do my inner work around it or not. I need to, because if I don't, I'm projecting my conflicts onto the system outside, and that's really not good citizenship at the end of the day. So it's important that I resolve what's within me and then engage with the system that's outside of me. Yeah, like you say, I guess a lot of, the tendency is to really jump out and work at the system. Largely because when you start engaging it within you, it's often not a beautiful path. It's a very uncomfortable journey, and that and also because there's so much spiritual bypassing around peace, if I can call it that. That when you talk of peace, there's this whole image of a Buddha sitting smiling, and that sort of an image that tends to be brought up, whereas the path to peace is really about navigating all sorts of ugly conflict inside of us. So it's not a very pretty path when you engage with it inside and out, and I'm guessing that's the reason why it's not engaged with as much. Having said that, I think of it as an essential evolutionary process. So I don't really think of it as a choice as much as a necessity. I'm not sure if that answers you, but yeah, that's what I have to say.
Can I?
Okay, Kuljinder ji and then Sonia.
In Indian context, as per your experience, are we moving to a saner world, or the number of conflicts and the nature of conflicts is on the increase, or it has reached a particular level, or we are going from bad to worse? Just your personal comment about that. You see some ray of hope or some sanity around us in near future?
Um, well, I'm guessing, I mean, if you have to go by the media narrative, we're probably getting more and more polarized by the day. Uh, so at least that's what is getting focused on and highlighted. At the same time, conversations like this are happening, right? Communities like this are also forming in a very quiet way. Uh, I think it's in many ways the whole idea of peace and resolution is still in a sort of a gestation stage. It's still in the womb, so to say, collectively. And so a lot of it is not really getting spoken about or popularized, but it is happening. And I'm guessing it's important to nurture these spaces, and at some point in time when there is a critical mass, for lack of a better word, it will at some point change the system. I mean, that's a prayer that I'd like to hold on to.
Just one add on to that, in the field in which you are you finding more people coming into it, or again we are in status quo, neither this side nor that side, or at least people of your category, are they getting motivated, or more and more people joining, or we still lack presence of such people like you in this field?
Not sure what my category means, but
No, the category, but
Peace,
this
peace
field, you can
builders,
say,
peace
the so many
educators.
people.
Yeah.
well, I think that there are more and more people getting interested in the process, because a lot of us are also questioning the state of the world right now, right? And what is in it for us, what's in it for our children or for our future generations. And I think that question is disturbing enough for people to want to act in some way. So that there's a lot more consciousness around ecology, around peace, that is coming in very different forms, right? There's not just one form of peace education. There's so many ways in which one can work at it. And even if an individual does work in their own very personal space, I think that's enough, but that's essential.
Okay, Sonia.
Hi. This has been a very
Possible to.
good and engaging conversation. And my compliments to Naveen for bringing out the best from Rukmini. What I wanted to ask Rukmini is to share a few bits about what has really influenced her. What are the people or influences that she looked up to in her journey, in the early part of her journey? What inspired her? Okay. And second is, I would say that let's carry this hope into this coming year, because there is a lot happening, like people like Rukmini, and those who can are doing, though they may not popularize it. So I also like the fact that Rukmini came on a social platform to speak about it, so that more people can see that hope and positivity. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Sonia. Yeah, Rukmini.
Thanks, Sonia. I join you in that prayer and hope. And influences, well, there have been so many along the way. If I have to talk of, in a way, academic influences, Marshall Rosenberg is someone that I'm hugely influenced by. Marshall Rosenberg is someone that propounded the nonviolent communication framework, and his work has deeply impacted me in terms of philosophy, even as a value around the work that I do. So that's definitely one influence. Tagore, in many ways, has been a very strong influence. Among practitioners, I mean, people that I've personally interacted with, so many of my teachers in conflict and peace, peace building. That there's a lady called Irene Santiago from the Philippines who's, I mean, she's probably close to 80 now, but still goes around, talks about women and peace, and a lot of work around how do we bring in women into the negotiation tables when it comes to peace building context. That's someone that I really look up to a lot. I mean, for some reason there aren't as many women in peace building, and I would think a lot of the state of the world is because of that reason. We need more women in these spaces. So yeah, it would be unfair to point out only a few names. There have been so many influences.
Thank you. And I'm sure you join them for the coming generation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Satya, over to you.
Thank you. I'm not able to turn on my video for some reason. Thank you, Rukmini. This has been really very inspiring hearing you, your experience. As an educator, right? I mean, peace education is something that is very, very difficult. And I don't know, even after hearing you, if I have fully understood what you mean by educating someone to resolve conflicts, because in the way I view education and learning, to a large extent, that inner conflict, and even from a pedagogical or theoretical standpoint, this cognitive dissonance, something that does not sit well, is what propels learning. If you agree, if you are resolved, if you have resolution, you don't really move and learn something new. It's that conflict that actually leads to learning. And working with children or young adults, it's harder, from my very limited experience, to embed pluralism as a value, right? To say that there can be multiple states that are not necessarily, that don't necessarily agree with one another, but there are multiple viewpoints that can coexist without resolution, right? Without saying one is right or one is wrong. In what ways are you able to teach young adults to embrace pluralism, because that's essential to be peaceful?
Absolutely, Satya. So, yeah, there is the pedagogical aspect of peace education, which is to look at frameworks around analyzing and resolving conflict. But that's only one small part of it. For me, I think the true learning is really about, can we build capacity for people to stay with questions and to stay uncomfortable, and to know that there is space for that. Somehow we've in the colonized framework of education, we've somehow made education about answers. I don't think it's about answers at all. It's really about, can we learn to ask the right questions and allow for the answers to allow for the questions to guide us into spaces. Maybe some of those spaces will provide answers, maybe some of it will be insights in other forms. But yeah, a lot of education for me is really about losing obsession with answers and working with questions.
That's great. Just a really quick follow-up. Do you think children have a greater capacity to sit with that discomfort, or do you think they are quicker? Of course, it's a leading question. Do you think they have a greater capacity to just accept multiple states of the world?
Absolutely. I think all of us, I think, are born with that capacity. Somewhere we get educated out of it.
That's right.
So a lot of it is really about reclaiming that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Satya and Rukmini. Every time Rukmini uses the word educated, I'm having to translate it as conditioned. We're conditioned, we're schooled,
Yeah.
into narrowing ourselves in some sense. Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. Thank you. We have another 5 minutes on the clock. So, is anybody who hasn't spoken yet or voiced your sharing, question, or comment yet? Now is a good time.
I have a small question.
Yes, Vidit. Or video if you can switch your
Sure.
video on. Yeah.
So, hi Rukmini, it was wonderful listening to you tonight. Just wanted to ask, like, when you have peacekeeping or peace building as an agenda, do you also have your ways to measure peace in some sort of ways?
So, yeah, I mean, one part of my work entails working with an institution called the Institute of Economics and Peace that's based in Australia, and they publish something that's called a Global Peace Index, where they measure parameters that reflect peace. So, in that sense, yeah, a framework for measurement is possible, but having said that, I wouldn't say that's an absolute reflection of reality, because a lot of what is measured are elements of what might be termed as negative peace, in the sense that there's for example, if you look at India right now, there's negative peace in the sense that we're not at war officially. So in that sense, technically we're at peace, but at the same time, there are elements of polarization and corruption and all of those things which don't quite contribute to peace. So yeah, there can be a measurement, but we also need to learn to look beyond the numbers there.
Hi, Rukmini, Tejdarshi here.
Hi, Teji.
Hi. I just wonder about basically the new generation. Specifically, you were talking about the education. Are you able to work with the government policymakers? And what do you think also about the current educational policy and how we can go sort of ahead with it?
Yes, there are a lot of peace builders that work on policy as well, and that is an essential part of the work. Like I said, but one is the inside out work, and there is also the outside in work that is simultaneously needed. So yes, that is part of the work. The education, the new education policy, well, that's I guess a conversation for another day, in the sense that there is a lot to talk about there. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, there is work that needs to be done at the level of the government. And at the same time, it's also important that it's not something that only stays as policy. Till the time we have civilians, you and I, involved in the peace building process, we can't quite hope for lasting peace on the outside. The system can only provide a framework for it. It's like, even if we have the perfect policies around peace, it's like building a really nice house with all kinds of amenities, but at the same time, can we call it home? Not quite. It'll still just be a house. We need to inhabit and make it home.
Thank you.
Great. We have time for, I guess, one more question, if there is any.
Yeah. Hi, Rukmini. Priya. So, thank you Thank you for that conversation. I think what I wanted to ask was, in the dialogue circles that you hold, mm, have there been any times when um, there may be blocks or bottlenecks that it will come to when there is a dialogue? So, if has that happened? And if yes, has there been any patterns around that, that there is this type of a block that comes to when there is a dialogue process going on? And then what happens? How does one deal with that? How do you work with that?
Yes, there are lots of blocks that happen, and blocks happen for multiple reasons. Very often it's because uh, at least one person in the dialogue tends to carry the belief that there isn't enough space for their own beliefs or that of another, and that in many ways gets projected onto the dialogue space, and that there is a block. And I think the work that can be done in that space is really to look at, can we create whatever level of psychological safety that is possible to allow for that block to exist, to stay with that lack of resolution, or to stay with that bottleneck, and to say that, okay, this also has a space, and this also exists in us, and this block has come in the dialogue because somewhere we hold it within us, and therefore it's occupied the space that's common to us. And sometimes when we stay with it and persist with holding that space, then it gets verbalized in some way, it gets spoken about, and that leads to movement for the larger group. A lot of sometimes it doesn't get verbalized because that we're not able to hold enough safety for it, and in that case we go back with the block and look at how it opens up in the coming days and weeks, everyone involved.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm guessing there isn't that much time, but I was also sitting with this thing of when I said what block, also particulars, I think, because
Okay.
these are people. We're
Mhm.
ultimately not
Yeah.
individuals with emotions, jealousy, anger, hurt, this kind of stuff. So I was wondering with blocks, are there specific, things that people hold, whatever.
It's actually pretty much like what you named yourself, right? Emotions around jealousy and anger, a lot of anger, a lot of sorrow, things that are not yet grieved for or mourned for, and those tend to take up space. So and therefore for me, I think it's important to hold space for things that are unexpressed in other spaces, because only when that expression happens, the collective moves ahead. And at the end of the day, any dialogue space is it's sort of a microcosm of the macrocosm that people come from, right? So if there's a block in the dialogue space, it's also because there's a block in the larger system, and what you process within the dialogue also in some ways gets processed for the larger system. So yeah.
Thank you.
Rukmini, there are a couple of requests to talk a little bit more about the looking into the mirror. So maybe if you could give a brief description of it, and is there some way we could read more about it or see some of the already existing videos around this and stuff?
So all the recordings of the previous conversations are on my YouTube channel, so you can look up those recordings. But what I can say about it is, yeah, it's a dialogue space where we are looking to deal with or talk about aspects of conflict that particularly impact our subcontinent. So far we've spoken about caste, about the partition, about racism, about indigenous, reconciling with indigenous ways of life. And yeah, that series, I hope to continue that series on to the next year, picking up on other aspects of conflict that impact us. So yeah, you can definitely look up the recordings on the Exult Solutions channel on YouTube. Put up the channel name
on chat. Yeah, maybe I'll also send them the link for it when I send a mail out to those on Purnam Cafe. But yeah, if you look up Exult Solutions on YouTube, I think you can get to the channel where there are lots of videos available. Yeah, excellent. So I guess we're near the end now, but if there are more questions, I'm sure there are more questions. We'll try and bring Rukmini back in a few months to build on this conversation. Yeah, so I hope many of our speakers can come back, periodically and keep building on what they've shared, in the last time. So thank you so much, Rukmini, for sharing and so much from your heart and from the depth of your experience. It's been very illuminating for me, and I'm sure I speak for many others in this circle as well. And thank you so much, and looking forward to ruminating on this and interacting with you further in the next few months. Yeah, thanks. And something else I want to really say. Um, it's escaping me now, unfortunately, but just wanted to say from the heart a big thanks. Very humbled and very thought-provoking. So I'm actually thinking about a lot of what you said, what you shared, and it's sort of reverberating somewhere deep within. So thank you, and looking forward to interacting with you further. Yeah, and a big thanks to all of you who showed up today and participated in this conversation. So
Thank you
see you
so
all,
much.
see you all again very soon. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Right.
Bye.